My name is Lori, and I am reading today from the New Living Translation, Habakkuk 1, 1-3. This is the message that the prophet Habakkuk received in a vision. How long, O Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Violence is everywhere, I cry, but you do not come to save. Must I forever see these evil deeds? Why must I watch all this misery? Wherever I look, I see destruction and violence. I am surrounded by people who love to argue and fight. Chapter 2, verses 2-3. Then the Lord said to me, write my answer plainly on tablets, so that a runner can carry the correct message to others. This vision is for a future time. It describes the end, and it will be fulfilled. If it seems slow in coming, wait patiently, for it will surely take place. It will not be delayed. Chapter 3, verses 17-19. Even though the fig trees have no blossoms, and there are no grapes on the vine, even though the olive crop fails, and the fields are empty and barren, even though the flocks die in the fields, and the cattle barns are empty, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in the God of my salvation. The sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes me as sure-footed as a deer, able to tread upon the heights.
Good morning, Trinity. Good morning. I'm so excited to be here. When I put on this outfit this morning, my husband, a Mennonite from Zurich, said I looked like I was dressed in Mennonite plainclothes preacher. So I hope that it fits for you guys. Long before I ever became a divorce coach, and long before I started helping people try to build healthy relationships, I had a very, very different kind of role to play. And I want you to know that in this role, I perceived myself to be very powerful. And I perceived myself to be super mysterious and very influential. I was, in fact, the astrologer of my junior high school newspaper. Now, if you didn't have this in your school, let me tell you how it looked. I took my role, yeah, that's me. I took my role very seriously, as you can see in this picture. I had a gel pen, and I had deadlines, and I believed in my head that this was the most read section of the newspaper. Because for teenagers in the 80s, give me a shout out if you were a teenager in the 80s, whoop, we believed in two things for sure. One, if you cuffed your jeans just right, you were awesome. And two, that the horoscope in the newspaper could absolutely be relied on to predict your life, and in particular, your love life, right? So I would, every couple of weeks, sit down with my big notebook, and I would start to channel all of the cosmic authority that my little 14-year-old body could muster, okay? I had no training. I had no supervision. And I will be very honest with you that I did not know what astrology was, okay? And yet, this was the 80s. There weren't any adults supervising anything, so I just wrote whatever I want. And I realized very quickly that I could use this unchecked medium to send cryptic messages to certain people in the student body whose attention that I really wanted, all right? I used it mostly for my own benefit. So, for example, if I wanted a certain guy to notice me, I might say, Sagittarius, don't overlook the blonde in your English class. Or if I was upset that my friends were fighting, I might say, Taurus, be the first to say you're sorry. It's more important to be friends than to be right. And of course, every single horoscope for Scorpio, which was my sign, was very flattering. Your outfit is rad. Your smile is great. Keep going. You've got this, those kind of themes. I really felt that I was this 14-year-old puppet master of the mid-Missouri cosmos. I wrote vague predictions, and I sent secret messages, and as you can tell, I had way too much confidence. But here's the thing. I genuinely believed at that young age that if I wrote it, people would follow it. I really felt like I could use words and I could nudge situations and I could steer outcomes and I could control people and results. And then I grew up and I realized what every adult realizes, that real life does not bend the way that you want it to, just because you want it to. And you can try to predict it and you can try to control it, influence it, manage it, but most days life doesn't obey your horoscope or your script or any of the scripts you handed out for other people to read. And that is exactly where we meet Habakkuk, or for those who say Habakkuk. This week was very painful for me because I did not know how I was supposed to be saying it. I decided on a pronunciation, then I came to church and Chris said it a different way and Lori said it a different way, so tomato, tomato, Habakkuk. Habakkuk wanted answers, okay? He wanted control, and he wanted God to act in a certain way and on a certain timeline. And instead, what Habakkuk got was confusion and delays and chaos and silence, our favorites. Everything that Habakkuk wanted was flat, and we've all been there, right? We've all had this feeling that there's no easy horoscope answer for my marriage is kind of in a funk, or my child is distant from me in ways that I can't seem to bridge, or my mental health is suffering and everything feels like a mess, or even just the simple one, I'm praying and nothing's happening. But that's exactly where the prophet Habakkuk is standing. He's facing a future he cannot predict, control, influence, or write into being. He just has uncertainty. And he enters into a conversation with God, and he says, God, this is not the way that I thought my life would go. And God says, I know, but watch and wait and write down what you see, because I'm doing something in you that has a much longer arc than what you expect. And I will be using very unexpected people and situations and very unwanted methods in order to bring that reality about. We'll get into more of the details here in a little bit, but God says to Habakkuk, I want you to stick with me, and I want you to stick with this long arc I'm casting, and in spite of everything being a mess, I want you to let me take the lead. Let me use the unthinkable to make it all come back together. And I think every person of faith probably eventually arrives at this crossroads where you kind of look at everything and you go, this isn't going to work anymore, and it's not right. And standing at this crossroads is a very little, stubborn, holy word, and that word is nevertheless. Nevertheless means I see the loss, I feel the confusion, I definitely question the methods, but I'm choosing trust anyway. It is the sacred defiance of hope, and it's exactly where Habakkuk discovers his nevertheless right here, where he, despite everything he sees being vacant and under-resourced, hopeless and misdirected, says, nevertheless, I will praise God, and I will pursue him, and I will let his plan, though wild and not at all what I would have picked, unfold. A little context to help us out this morning. For those of you who are interested in history, for those of you who aren't, you can take a little snooze cruise. But there are three key players in this story, okay? I know we just finished a study on Nehemiah, right? And this story of Habakkuk fits into history about 150 years prior to Nehemiah. So Nehemiah represented the end of the Babylonian exile period, and Habakkuk prophesied just before the exile began. So where Habakkuk was mourning the destruction of Jerusalem, Nehemiah was tasked with rebuilding it. And it's super confusing because Habakkuk actually comes after Nehemiah in the Bible, but it becomes chronologically before it in how it unfolds. Does that make sense? Not really, but it does. So this is written around 600 BC, and it is just before Judah is invaded and exiled. The Assyrian Empire is collapsing, and this brutal new superpower named Babylon is rising fast. So these three players. You've got Habakkuk. He's a prophet who talks to God about the people. And that's different than other prophets who talk to the people about God, all right? Just a little bit different. Then you've got Judah, God's people, spiritually drifting, getting more corrupt themselves. Then you've got Babylon. And Babylon is this violent pagan empire known for corruption and destruction and mostly bad news. So Habakkuk opens his book. This is the tiniest little cute 3-chapter book in the Bible. He opens in the first chapter almost like he's checking his spiritual horoscope. And he's like, God, what is happening? What does this mean? Give me a sign, something, His opening remarks, he says, how long, O Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Violence is everywhere, I cry, but you don't come to save. Must I forever see these evil deeds? Why must I watch all this misery? Wherever I look, I see destruction and violence. I'm surrounded by people who love to argue and fight. Habakkuk is like, I am sick of this mess, and I'm really tired of being around all of this conflict. All I do is ask you for help, and you leave me hanging. And God answers Habakkuk by giving him a little bit of a horoscope. He says, everything's awful in Judah, right? Habakkuk is saying, everything's awful in Judah. I've got this political turmoil, and I've got lots of idolatry happening. And God says in chapter 1, a little bit later after this, he says, no problem. I'm sending Babylon to fix it. Now, I'm not a Bible expert, but I can tell you that sending Babylon to fix Judah is like sending the bully to teach the kindness class in school. That doesn't work, right? You're using a more evil nation, Babylon, to fix a relatively less evil nation in Judah. And so God, Habakkuk decides to wait for an answer. He kind of puts his complaint up, like, this is not making sense to me. And he looks for a response, and God says, slow down. I don't like any of this either, but I am always up to something. In chapter 2, he says, then the Lord said to me, write my answer plainly on tablets so that a runner can carry the correct message to others. This vision is for a future time. It describes the end, and it will be fulfilled. I don't like this part. If it seems slow in coming, wait patiently, and it will surely take place. It will not be delayed. This, my friends, is the long arc. For Habakkuk, God basically says, look beyond today. I'm working on a timeline way bigger than this moment, which, by the way, is very unlike my middle school astrology. I never would have written, Leo, it's going to take 20 years, but you'll get there. That's mean, right? But that's exactly what God says. My promises unfold over time. I remember when I was going through sort of the never-ending adjustments to divorce that started maybe 15 years ago. And I would often get together with my first mother-in-law and share my heart and talk about my family. And she was a confidant for me, and she walked with me through so much of what it meant to recover and to rebuild. And one of the last conversations that I had with her last year before she died was a really important one for me to hear. I was sharing some recent event that was unfolding between family members that was causing some fractures, and I was distressed by the space that it was causing. And I was kind of talking a little bit about my hopes, and then I was just really honest about how I felt like there wasn't a lot of hope left. And she said something that I've never forgotten. She said, Andrea, you need to remember that relationships have a very long arc. And this is what she did with her hand, a very long arc. And what she meant was they don't resolve themselves in the moment that you start panicking. And they don't feel better at the speed of your anxiety. They bend and they dip and they take detours and they get really quiet and they get really loud. And then sometimes when you least expect it, they bend back toward connection again. And she was right. I will tell you that the arc for me has always been longer than I wanted, longer than I predicted, using people and scenes and disappointments, Babylon style, that I never would have ordered. Betrayals, long silences, misunderstandings, longer than I would have ever used in my astrology. But God has been and still has been working and still is working the whole time. And that's where Habakkuk is standing. He says, God, I'm looking at today and it looks pretty broken. And I'm looking at the next chapter and it actually looks even worse. And God says, Habakkuk, I have a really long arc. It's longer than Babylon. It's longer than what you can see. It's longer than what scares you. Write this down and wait for it because I'm not done. And I know some of you are sitting here in a season or a situation or a relationship where you think nothing is working, or it's certainly not working the way that you want it to. And the plan is making no sense. And the Babylon solution is more confusing than comforting for you. But I want you to know that that is when the long arc of God does its best work. And every time you show up to worship with no visible change and no obvious breakthrough or lifting of the pain, no quick fix, you're just saying like Habakkuk did, nevertheless, I still believe that God is bending the arc. And you see in chapter 3, the final chapter of this 3-chapter book, Habakkuk lays it out pretty raw. Even though the fig trees have no blossoms, there's no grapes on the vines, even though the olive crop has failed and the fields lie empty and barren, even though the flocks die in the fields and the cattle barns are empty, Habakkuk is facing the worst case scenario. He's basically listing total economic and agricultural collapse. There's no food and there's no animals. If we were to update this to a more contemporary reading, it might say, there's no progress or easy fix from the doctor. Not as much money as you need to feel secure. No clarity about the situation or the future that you want with it. No restoration with your family member. No apology you deserved. No peace in your marriage. No mental health in your loved one. No peace between nations anytime soon. And in verse 18, Habakkuk says, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in the God of my salvation. Yet, nevertheless, I will rejoice in the Lord. What nevertheless faith is not denial. It's not railroading your own feelings and minimizing pain and pretending and ignoring reality. It's not toxic positivity. Nevertheless, faith is defiant hope. It's worshiping in the dark, and it's trusting when there's nothing visible, and it's standing on God's character and on his promises and not on your short-term circumstances. And you know what makes being a nevertheless Christian just a little bit easier? It's the verse that comes just after this one. Habakkuk lists all the ways he's at a seeming dead end, and then he offers up his nevertheless, and he finishes with this. The sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes me as sure-footed as a deer, able to tread upon the heights. Did you catch that right in there? It makes being a nevertheless Christian possible, even on the days you feel shaky. It's in the last one. There's no figs, there's no grapes, there's no sheep, there's no cattle. Nothing's working. Then he says, nevertheless, I'll rejoice. And then he ends with this promise. The sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes me sure-footed as a deer, able to tread upon the heights. Now, many of you in this room are hikers, and you hear that word heights and tread on the heights, and you think, yes, trails, switchbacks, let's go. And you're outdoorsy, and I would imagine if I asked you, you probably have an opinion on socks and shoes that you would be happy to share with me. You are the type of people who willingly climb things on purpose, and I am not one of you. I did not grow up climbing anything. I grew up on a lake. And my version of the heights was standing on the edge of a dock and deciding whether or not I was getting my hair wet that day. So when I was a senior in high school, I had the chance to go parasailing, which is this where you glide through the air with this open parachute, and there's a rope, and the boat is towing you on the lake. And I thought, this is it. I'm going to be adventurous. All right? I'm going to be brave. I'm going to be a heights person. And I need you to know the gravity of this situation is that I paid so much money for this experience, all right? My own money. I worked at Baskin-Robbins. It was my own money, and I remember exactly how much it cost. Then I got upsold, all right? I paid even more money for the deluxe package. And the deluxe package is where in the middle of the trip they would let you drop, and you would touch the water with your feet, and then they would bring you back up. And I was like, this sounds beautiful. This is me, right? So when I finally got up there, and the boat, I did not know this was the process, just turns its engine off, It just turns itself off, and I'm up here and I'm trapped in lots of strings and things, and I start to fall to the water, and I think, there's no way in the world that I'm doing this. I'm not doing this. And this is what I pictured. I pictured I was going to fall to the lake. My legs were going to go straight down in it. They would get caught up. I would go face down, and then I would drown. And that would be it. That's what I pictured, because I have never been a physics girl, so I didn't understand how this was going to work. I didn't see how it could work. So instead of hanging my feet down like a normal person who paid extra money to do it, I panicked. And I piked my legs out so straight. I can't do it anymore. I was little then. So straight, like I was in a competitive dive, because there was no way that they could get my feet and toes in the water if they were parallel to the lake. And I stayed like that until that guy was done and took me back up. I'm like, nope. And I want you to see that that is the exact opposite of sure-footed. That is panic-footed, all right? And sometimes that is how faith feels for me. And it probably does for you too. We say, God, I trust you. Nevertheless. And then the engine cuts, and the moment comes, and we start dropping to the water, and we need control back. And we want to stay safe in the way that we know how, and we're not really ready to trust the thing that we said we were ready to trust in. But here's the good news. God does not need you to feel sure-footed in order to make you sure-footed. God does not need you to feel sure-footed in order to make you sure-footed. Habakkuk does not say, I strengthen myself like a deer. He says, the sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes me sure-footed as a deer. And he steadies what shakes, and he strengthens what starts to buckle, and he strengthens what feels weak, and he makes your feet do a whole lot of things you never thought they would do. Nevertheless, God meets you with strength. Nevertheless, God gives you footing, and nevertheless, he lifts you to heights that you thought were impossible. He has given out in this room alone a lot of deer feet. Each of us has some deer feet, even in some places we probably don't even want. I see the deer feet of Pastor Chris landing in a church and stepping into leadership he never expected. I see the deer feet of Ruth Yoder, who has lost a child and continues to climb. I see the feet of every person who's in a loving relationship in this room, struggling to just communicate well and do the right thing. I see the feet of my mom, whose body gives her a struggle every day. And I see the feet of Stephen Stone, who lives with a joyous heart and a limitation he never expected. And I see lots of people raising kids in a world that looks nothing like the one they grew up in or the one that they hoped they could offer to their children. These are the deer feet. We need to be a church who lives our nevertheless out loud, and we need to let people see the deer feet that God is giving us. Your struggle matters. And the deer feet that God has given you in it matter, and each of you are part of the message that I'm getting every week. Your presence here says quietly and sometimes loudly, I'm living my nevertheless, and I'm taking what it is, and I'm trusting God to do something with it. Your nevertheless is not just this line in Scripture. It's your life, and it's your testimony. And when you come here with life in a funk, and marriage looking crummy, and your loneliness, and your grief, and your defeat, and your worry about your family member, you are preaching a sermon to everyone in here. And out of protection, sometimes we hide the story. We don't like the in-between. I particularly don't. We don't like that we live in a psalm. We live in this crunchy in-between of delight and despair and energy and fatigue. But my faith needs to hear about it from you. I need to see your feet so that I can keep going too. When you're sharing your story, you're telling me and others, I'm not strong. Nevertheless, God is giving me strength. And I don't always feel steady. Nevertheless, God makes my feet like a deer. And I don't know what's coming next. Nevertheless, I'm trusting the long arc of God. Your life is a sermon, and I need to hear it from you. So if I could put my junior high school astrologer hat on one more time this week, this is what I would write for us. This week, expect strength in unexpected places. God is handing out deer feet to each of you, the kind that will keep you steady on ground that seems shaky. Affirm the dear feet you see around you, and don't miss your own. God wants us to notice them. And you will have many moments this week to say, nevertheless. And each one contributes to the long arc of your relationship with God.